Something is happening in America right now that many people can feel in their bones, even if they can't always explain it. The conversation keeps surfacing everywhere, in dinner table talks, in workplaces, in travel blogs, and across social media, that America is breaking down, and in some ways, starting to resemble what we would once call a third world country. It sounds shocking at first. After all, the United States has long been seen as the wealthiest, most advanced nation on Earth. But when you dig beneath the surface, when you set aside the glossy image and look at the reality millions of Americans live every single day, the cracks in the system are too big to ignore. So, let's lay out the facts clearly and see whether this country is truly moving in the wrong direction. The first thing that hits almost everyone is the cost of living. Over the past few years, prices for nearly everything, housing, groceries, medical bills, transportation, and utilities, have surged. Inflation peaked in 2022 at levels not seen in 40 years, and although official statistics say it has cooled, that doesn't change what people experience every day. A trip to the grocery store feels heavier on the wallet. Rent swallows half of a paycheck. A family eating out at a casual restaurant now pays double what they did a decade ago. And while prices climb, wages barely budge. Real income growth for the middle class has been stagnant for decades, meaning workers are effectively treading water in an economy where everything around them gets more expensive by the month. That imbalance, rising costs against stagnant wages, creates a sense of hopelessness. People feel trapped, always one unexpected bill away from financial disaster. This financial strain ties directly into the surge in homelessness across the country. In late 2023, government data reported more than 650,000 Americans living without stable housing, the highest figure ever recorded. In reality, advocates argue the true number may be far higher once you account for people living in cars, couch surfing, or doubling up with relatives. Major cities from Los Angeles to New York are filled with tent encampments that authorities can't seem to control. Suburbs that once felt insulated are now seeing families forced into motels, shelters, or the street. The image of the American dream, homeownership, stability, opportunity, collides with the sight of entire families sleeping under overpasses. But the problem doesn't stop at housing. Food insecurity is also rising at an alarming rate. The USDA reported that around 44 million Americans lived in food-insecure households as of 2022, meaning they didn't always know where their next meal would come from. That's the highest number in nearly 2 decades. The cruel twist is that it isn't about food not being available. It's about food not being affordable. Ultra-processed, calorie-dense junk is relatively cheap, but healthy, nutrient-rich food is out of reach for many families. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, filling the cart with fruits, vegetables, lean protein, and fresh staples feels like a luxury. That leads to diets heavy in fast food and processed goods, fueling a public health crisis that is both physical and financial. And that crisis shows up in the statistics. More than 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. 6 in 10 adults live with at least one chronic illness, whether it's diabetes, hypertension, or heart disease. These conditions don't just shorten lives, they drain bank accounts. The United States spends more on healthcare than any other country on Earth, about $13,000 per person each year, nearly double the average in other developed nations. A single ambulance ride can cost thousands. A night in a hospital can wipe out savings. Even for those with insurance, deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses leave families drowning in bills. Ask anyone who has had a serious medical emergency in the US, and you'll hear horror stories of $8,000, $10,000, even $20,000 in bills after insurance. Compare that to a country like South Korea, where the same treatment might cost only a few $100s. The message is clear. Getting sick in America is a financial catastrophe. Healthcare here is less about healing and more about money. And the bitter truth is that most people are sick. That means the cost burden is hitting households everywhere. Debt makes the situation worse. Total household debt has soared past $17 trillion, with credit card balances alone exceeding $1.3 trillion. Car loans are stretched to record lengths, 6 or 7 years, just so buyers can afford monthly payments. Student loan borrowers struggle to make ends meet as interest accumulates. Delinquency rates are creeping up again, especially among younger Americans. When almost every aspect of life requires borrowing, debt becomes a permanent condition, not a temporary bridge. It's not an exaggeration to say that for many, America is a debt trap. Layer on top of that the widening wealth gap. The top 1% of Americans now hold over 30% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 50% hold only about 2%. This means the very people who make the economy run, workers stocking shelves, driving trucks, teaching children, repairing homes, see little reward for their labor, while investors and corporations accumulate staggering fortunes. The system is working exactly as designed, to funnel money upward, leaving the majority of the population scrambling to get by. Consumerism only adds to the pressure. American society runs on spending, on subscriptions, upgrades, gadgets, and debt-financed lifestyles. The culture promotes the idea that buying more will make us happy. In reality, it only ties people further into the cycle of debt and dependence. When wages can't keep up with costs, credit cards and buy now, pay later schemes fill the gap, ensuring that consumers stay hooked on a system that extracts as much money as possible. This isn't just about money, it's about control. The people at the top, who understand how wealth really works, don't grind away at multiple jobs. They let money work for them through investments, assets, and ownership. Meanwhile, the hardest working Americans often end up with the least because labor itself isn't what gets rewarded. That's the dark irony. The so-called land of opportunity often rewards financial positioning over hard work. Traveling abroad highlights this difference. Americans who go overseas often discover that healthcare, transportation, food, and housing can be drastically cheaper elsewhere. In Europe or Asia, a cross-country flight might cost $100. In the US, traveling from New York to Los Angeles can easily run $600 or more. In many countries, you can rent a clean, comfortable apartment for what it costs to rent a single bedroom in an American city. These comparisons raise a tough question. If other developed countries can provide affordability and stability, why can't the United States? All of this fuels the growing sentiment that America is declining, some even saying it's becoming third world. Of course, by global measures, the US is still one of the richest, most technologically advanced nations. But what defines the quality of life for ordinary people isn't military power or GDP. It's whether they can afford housing, feed their families, stay healthy, and live without the constant fear of financial collapse. And on those measures, millions of Americans are struggling. The American dream promised that hard work, discipline, and persistence would lead to success. But today, the hardest working people, those with 2 or 3 jobs, are often the poorest. They're not building wealth, they're barely surviving. The dream is still alive for some, but for many others, it has become a story that feels more like a cruel illusion. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice: to accept the system as it is, corporate-driven, debt-dependent, inequality-ridden, or to begin questioning it, to ask ourselves hard questions. Why do we spend our lives working without getting ahead? Why do we tolerate paying more for worse health care than almost anyone else in the world? Why are so many people one car breakdown or medical bill away from homelessness? Why are our cities filled with people living in tents while billionaires build private rockets? These aren't abstract policy debates. They are daily realities shaping the lives of millions. And unless we recognize them for what they are, a system designed to keep us trapped, nothing will change. That recognition requires courage. It requires stepping outside of fear, questioning the narrative, and seeing that the carrot being dangled in front of us is designed to keep us running in circles. Some of the most eye-opening lessons come from places Americans often look down on. In countries that outsiders dismiss as third world, people may lack money, but they often thrive in areas America has neglected: family, community, tradition, resilience. They may not have excess wealth, but they have stronger social bonds and often a healthier sense of purpose. By contrast, the wealthiest country in the world is filled with anxiety, disconnection, and burnout. So, is America broken? In many ways, yes. It is broken for the millions of families drowning in debt, for the people sleeping in shelters or cars, for the workers who labor endlessly without ever moving ahead. But broken does not mean hopeless. It means the system isn't working for the majority, and that realization is the first step to change. Because at the end of the day, the real question is not whether America is becoming a third world country. The question is whether we are willing to keep living inside a system designed to keep us in fear and debt, or whether we will redefine success for ourselves. Success does not have to mean being part of the top 1%. It can mean breaking free from debt. It can mean building a life where emergencies don't destroy you. It can mean finding happiness outside of consumerism and creating a future that isn't dictated by corporations and greed. And maybe that's the real American dream today. Not the promise that working harder will make you rich, but the promise that you can reclaim your life, that you can define what success looks like for yourself, and that you don't have to remain trapped in a system that sees you only as a source of profit. So ask yourself, what does success mean to you? Is it the endless chase for material things, or is it building a life where you're free, where you're healthy, and where you have the power to decide your own path? Because if there's one truth that cuts through all the noise, it's this: the fear of staying trapped should always be greater than the fear of breaking free. And once you see that clearly, you realize you don't have to wait for anyone else. You don't have to wait for Washington or Wall Street or the 1% to give you permission. You can take that first step now. And in a country where so much is uncertain, maybe the greatest form of freedom left is deciding that your life, your happiness, and your future will not be defined by a system built to keep you down. That's when you stop asking whether America is becoming a third world country and start asking yourself, am I willing to keep living in a broken system, or am I ready to step outside of it? The answer to that question is yours alone.